the polished world of corporate ambition, there is a common and often fatal miscalculation. People mistake silence for weakness, and they confuse quiet focus with a lack of engagement. They fail to understand that within that stillness, a mind can be observing, calculating, and most importantly, remembering every single detail. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, under the sterile, fluorescent lights of an 11th floor human resources office, Liam Carter was the living embodiment of that miscalculation. The air in the room was thick, with a rehearsed, hollow politeness that was more suffocating than honest anger. Across the glass table, Marcus Vance, his director, wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of practiced expression reserved for delivering bad news that one feels they are above. Beside him, the HR manager looked on with a face of professional neutrality, a mask designed to absorb and deflect any raw human emotion. Marcus leaned forward, steepling his hands. "Liam," he began, his voice smooth and measured, "your performance metrics are, as always, impeccable. You're a wizard with code, nobody denies that. But, and this is a difficult conversation, we feel there's a disconnect when it comes to the company culture." The phrase hung in the air, vague and venomous. Innovatec is all about synergy, about a vibrant, collaborative energy. We need team players who are visible. And while your work is top tier, you're just not proving to be the right culture fit. Liam said nothing. He simply watched. A glacial calm had settled over him, an external stillness that betrayed the tectonic shift happening within his soul. His silence wasn't submission. It was the silence of a system processing an unforgivable error, logging every detail for a future directive. He noted the slight twitch in Marcus's jaw, the way the HR manager subtly avoided his gaze. His eyes drifted past Marcus's shoulder toward the glass wall of the office. Through the horizontal blinds, he could see a silhouette he knew, as well as his own reflection. Sarah. She was standing there, pretending to be engrossed in a conversation, but her posture was rigid, her attention fixed on the room she had just exited. His best friend. The one who knew about his project, his ambitions, his fears. The one he trusted. She didn't look at him. That was all the confirmation he needed. The HR manager slid a thick folder across the table. "If you could just sign here, Liam." He picked up the pen, his movements deliberate. He signed his name without reading the documents. It didn't matter what they said. Words were meaningless now. Only actions would have weight. He stood up, placed the pen neatly beside the folder, and slid his security badge across the table. There was a soft, clinical click as the manager deactivated it. In that single, insignificant sound, a career was terminated, a friendship was vaporized, and in the cold, silent depths of Liam's mind, a promise was being forged in ice and fire. To understand the man Liam Carter became, you must first understand the man he was. He was not a creature of the loud, vibrant world that Innovatec Solutions claimed to champion. His own world was one of quiet corners, of the scent of old books, and the low hum of a custom-built computer. His small apartment, meticulously clean and orderly, was more of a laboratory than a home. It was a sanctuary dedicated to two things: the elegant, flowing logic of code and the comfort of his mother, whose quiet strength was slowly being diminished by a chronic illness that required constant and expensive care. This was the core of Liam's drive, the silent engine that pushed him through 14-hour workdays. His job at Innovatec wasn't a passion project or a quest for corporate glory. It was a lifeline. It was the armor that protected the only person who mattered to him. This responsibility shaped him. He didn't have time for the performative networking and forced camaraderie that the modern workplace demanded. He wasn't antisocial. He was simply focused, his energy a finite resource, allocated with ruthless precision. To his colleagues, this read as aloofness, an arrogant detachment. They saw a man who arrived precisely on time, put on his noise-canceling headphones, and disappeared into the glowing depths of his multiple monitors. They saw a man who politely declined invitations for after-work drinks and weekend team-building exercises. They did not see the man who spent his lunch break on the phone with insurance companies, or the man who stayed up until 3 in the morning, not just debugging corporate software, but also researching experimental treatments for his mother. To Liam, code was not just a job, it was a language more pure and honest than any spoken word. He saw its architecture in his mind, a cathedral of logic where every line had a purpose, every function a meaning. This was a world where merit was absolute. A line of code either worked or it did not. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for office politics or charming lies. He naively believed the corporate world operated on a similar principle. He thought that if his work was flawless, if his contribution was undeniable, he would be immune to the social games played around him. The ecosystem of Innovatech was, in every way, the antithesis of Liam's world. It was an open-plan office, painted in aggressively cheerful primary colors, a design meant to foster collaboration, but which, in reality, only amplified distraction. The air was a constant cacophony of ringing phones, loud conversations about reality television, and the booming laughter of his director, Marcus Vance. Marcus was a master of the corporate stage. He was handsome, charismatic, and possessed a rare talent for making everyone feel like they were his special project. He would stride through the office, a whirlwind of expensive cologne and confident energy, clapping people on the back and remembering the names of their children. He often stopped at Liam's desk, leaning over with a conspiratorial grin. "There he is," Marcus would boom, making Liam flinch. "The ghost in the machine, my secret weapon. Don't work too hard, Liam, you make the rest of us look bad." It was a compliment wrapped in a command, a public acknowledgement that also served to subtly isolate him. Liam, unversed in these nuances, took it at face value. He believed Marcus saw his value, that the title, secret weapon, was a sign of respect, not a label for a tool to be used and discarded. If Marcus was the sun around which Innovatech orbited, Sarah Jenkins was the planet that made Liam's own orbit bearable. She was clever, ambitious, and possessed the social grace that Liam lacked. Her desk was next to his, and she had, over time, broken through his quiet reserve. She became his translator for the strange, unwritten rules of the office. She would lean over and whisper, "Chad is pitching that idea you mentioned last week. You might want to pay attention, or Marcus is in a bad mood. Lay low today." She was the one who brought him coffee when he'd been at the office all night, the one who would listen intently as he, in a rare burst of excitement, tried to explain the complex beauty of a new algorithm. He trusted her. She was his one connection to the human side of the company, his firewall against the overwhelming social demands. He told her about his mother. He told her about his dreams of creating something truly revolutionary. He saw her as a kindred spirit, an ally in a world of noise. He never noticed the flicker of calculation in her eyes when he spoke of his ideas, or the way her supportive smiles were always a little too quick. And then there was Chad. Chad was the embodiment of the Innovatech culture. His technical skills were average at best, his contributions often superficial, but his social genius was undeniable. He organized the Fantasy Football League. He was the first to suggest drinks on a Friday. He knew how to flatter Marcus, laughing the loudest at his jokes and reframing his own mediocre ideas using the latest corporate buzzwords until they sounded profound. He and Marcus were a unit, their loud conversations and inside jokes forming a wall that excluded those who weren't part of their club. Liam would watch them, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. He saw how an idea from Chad, poorly conceived but confidently presented, would receive praise and resources, while a meticulously planned project from a quieter engineer would be passed over. It was a world built on perception, not substance. The company's motto, emblazoned on the wall, was innovation through collaboration. But in practice, it was advancement through affirmation. Liam believed he could exist outside of this. He believed that his work, his pure, undeniable results, would speak for itself. He trusted in Marcus's public praise and in Sarah's private friendship. He saw them as the fixed points in his professional universe, the solid ground upon which he could build a secure future for himself and his mother. He failed to realize that in the shifting landscape of corporate politics, the ground beneath your feet is never truly solid, and the people you trust the most are often the ones holding the shovel. The seed of betrayal is never planted in a moment of anger. It is sown in a moment of complete and utter trust. For Liam Carter, that moment arrived on a quiet Thursday evening, long after the cheerful noise of Innovatech had faded into the hum of dormant computers and the whisper of the building's ventilation system. The idea for what he called Project Chimera had not come to him in a flash of inspiration, but rather as a slow, creeping realization. For months, he had watched the company waste millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours on a clumsy, outdated development pipeline. He saw brilliant engineers shackled by inefficient processes, their creativity suffocated by bureaucratic guesswork. Different departments operated in silos, hoarding information and moving with the sluggishness of tectonic plates. Everyone complained about it in meetings and over coffee, but they accepted it as a necessary evil, an unchangeable law of corporate physics. Liam, however, saw it as a flaw in the code of the company itself. And like any flaw in code, he felt an obsessive, undeniable compulsion to fix it. So, he began to build. After caring for his mother each evening, when the rest of the city was surrendering to sleep, Liam would return to his own world, the one illuminated by the glow of his monitors. He built Chimera from the ground up, a secret project that became his sole obsession outside of his mother's care. It was an elegant, almost living piece of software. It was a predictive analytics engine designed to function as a central nervous system for the entire company. It could analyze market data, internal workflows, and even potential supply chain disruptions, weaving them all together to predict problems before they arose and identify opportunities that no human could see. It was designed to break down the silos, to create a seamless flow of information that would allow Innovatech to move faster, think smarter, and innovate on a level their competitors could only dream of. The name, Chimera, came from its hybrid nature, part data analyst, part logistician, part oracle. For 6 months, it was his entire world. The lines of code were a reflection of his own mind, complex, efficient, and completely isolated. He poured every spare ounce of his intellect and energy into it, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the quiet conviction that he was creating something that would finally make all his silence, all his perceived detachment, worth it. He was building the proof of his value, a monument of pure logic that no one could ignore. When it was finally ready, a strange and unfamiliar feeling washed over him, the need to share it. The secret was too big, the potential too vast to keep to himself. And there was only one person in the entire company he trusted enough to understand not just the code, but the heart of what he had built. On that quiet Thursday, as Sarah Jenkins was packing her bag to leave, he walked over to her desk. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Do you have a few minutes? There's something I need to show you." She looked up, a little surprised by his directness, but smiled. "Of course, Liam. What's up?" He led her back to his desk, the last island of light in the darkening office. The intimacy of the moment was palpable. It felt less like a workplace interaction and more like a sacred confidence. With a deep breath, he launched the program. "I've been working on something," he began, his usual monotone cracking with a rare, raw passion. "At home. Something to fix. Well, everything." For the next hour, the quiet, reserved Liam disappeared. In his place was a visionary, his hands flying across the keyboard, his voice filled with an energy Sarah had never heard before. He didn't just explain Chimera, he made her see it. He ran simulations, showing her how it could have predicted the costly failure of their last major product launch. He demonstrated how it could optimize resource allocation for a project that was currently bleeding money. "It's not just an algorithm, Sarah," he said, his eyes shining with the reflection of the screen. "It's a nervous system. It can feel the pulse of the market, the health of our own workflows. It lets us stop guessing and start knowing. This could put us 5 years ahead of everyone else." He finally stopped, his chest heaving slightly, and looked at her, his expression open and vulnerable. He had just laid the most valuable part of his professional soul bare before her. "This is our ticket," he whispered, the words full of a future he had already started to build in his mind. "Not just mine, ours. We take this to Marcus together. Imagine leading this, Sarah." Imagine what we could do. For a moment, Sarah was genuinely speechless. The sheer scale and brilliance of what he had built were undeniable. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Then, she turned to him, her face a perfect mask of awe and supportive friendship. "Liam," she breathed, placing a hand on his arm. It's genius. It's revolutionary. This is the most incredible thing I have ever seen." She mirrored his excitement perfectly, asking smart questions, her eyes wide with what he could only interpret as shared ambition. "You are absolutely right," she continued, her voice firm with conviction. "You have to show this to Marcus, but we have to be smart about it. Let me help you put together the perfect presentation. We'll make sure you get all the credit you deserve." He felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. She understood. She was with him. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew I could trust you." She squeezed his arm gently. "Always," she promised. "This is our secret. We'll do this right. Your name will be in lights, Liam. I'll make sure of it." As Liam finally packed his own bag, a feeling of pure euphoria washing over him, he did not see the look that lingered on Sarah's face as she stared at the glowing screen of Project Chimera. The awe was still there, but it was now mingled with something else, something cold and sharp. It was the look of a prospector who had just been handed a map to an unguarded gold mine. Liam had just given her the key, and in her mind, the lock had already begun to turn. The week that followed the revelation of Project Chimera was, for Liam, a blur of nervous energy and intoxicating hope. True to her word, Sarah became his dedicated strategist, his campaign manager for the single most important meeting of his life. She insisted they couldn't just walk into Marcus's office unprepared. It had to be a masterpiece of corporate theater. "Marcus doesn't just buy an idea," she explained, her tone that of a seasoned political advisor. "He buys a vision. He buys a story. We have to sell him the story of Chimera, with you as the hero." Liam, who thought only in terms of data and functionality, was immensely grateful. He saw her efforts as a selfless act of friendship, a necessary bridge across the chasm that separated his world of logic from Marcus's world of influence. Together, they worked late each night. Liam would provide the substance, the intricate details, and the powerful data projections. Sarah, with a deftness that was almost surgical, would then translate it all into the language Marcus understood. She transformed his dense technical documents into sleek, minimalist slides with powerful keywords: synergy, proactive disruption, future, proofing. She coached him on his delivery, urging him to trim the technical jargon. "Don't tell him how the engine works, Liam," she'd advise. "Just show him the sports car it powers. Focus on the bottom line, the competitive edge. Make it sound inevitable." Liam soaked it all in, feeling a partnership solidify between them. He felt they were a perfect combination of right brain and left brain, of creator and communicator. He was the architect, and she was the diplomat who would ensure the world recognized the genius of his design. He failed to see that she was not just simplifying his work, she was mastering it. With every slide she designed, with every talking point she memorized, she was absorbing his creation, making it her own. She was learning to speak his language, not to amplify his voice, but to one day replace it. By the time the day of the meeting arrived, Liam felt a confidence he had never known. The presentation was polished, his arguments were airtight, and his trusted ally was by his side. Marcus's office was a statement of power. Located on the corner of the top floor, it had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a constant reminder of the world he aimed to conquer. The furniture was sleek, black, and minimalist. It was less an office and more a throne room. Marcus greeted them with his signature easy charm, gesturing for them to sit at the small conference table in the corner. "All right," he said, leaning back with a relaxed smile. "Sarah told me you two have cooked up something special. Dazzle me." Liam took a deep breath and began, his voice a little shaky at first as he stuck to the script they had rehearsed. Sarah sat beside him, a reassuring presence, interjecting smoothly to add a business-centric spin or to steer the conversation back to profitability. She played the role of the perfect supporting actress. But then, as Liam pulled up the live demonstration of Chimera, something shifted. The carefully constructed script fell away, and the raw, unbridled passion of the creator took over. He forgot about the corporate speak and began to talk about the sheer elegance of the system, the beauty of its predictive power. He showed Marcus how Chimera could have saved them from 3 specific, costly mistakes in the past year. He showed him how it could map out a development path for a new product with 90% accuracy. He was no longer a nervous employee pitching a project. He was an artist unveiling his life's work. And across the table, Marcus Vance underwent a transformation of his own. The relaxed, charming boss persona dissolved, replaced by the sharp, focused intensity of a predator that has just spotted its prey. His eyes, which had been lazily scanning the slides, were now locked onto the screen, his pupils slightly dilated. He leaned forward, the casual posture gone, his mind visibly racing, calculating, processing. He wasn't just seeing a good idea, he was seeing a path to his next promotion, a weapon that could catapult his career into the stratosphere. He began to fire off questions, not the superficial inquiries of a typical manager, but sharp, insightful probes that cut to the very heart of the system. He was testing it, trying to find a flaw, a weakness. Liam, thrilled to finally be speaking with someone who grasped the sheer magnitude of what he had built, met every question with a brilliant, unhesitating answer. The 2 men were locked in a high-stakes intellectual dance, while Sarah watched from the side, a silent, smiling observer whose work was now complete. Finally, Marcus fell silent. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below for a long moment. The silence was heavy with unspoken potential. Liam held his breath. Then, Marcus turned, and his gaze was fixed solely on Liam. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but firm. "That was excellent work helping Liam package this. Can you give us a minute, please?" It was a clear dismissal. Liam felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Marcus wanted to speak to him. Alone. After Sarah closed the door behind her with a knowing smile, Marcus gestured for Liam to join him at the window. He put a hand on Liam's shoulder, a gesture that was both paternal and proprietary. "Liam," he said, his voice dropping to a low, confidential tone, "I'm going to be completely honest with you. What you just showed me in there, it isn't a project. It's the future. It's the key to the next decade of this company." He looked at Liam, his eyes boring into him. "I've been watching you. You're quiet, but I see the wheels turning. I always knew you had something like this in you." The flattery was potent, a targeted strike at Liam's deepest desire, to be seen for his intellect, not his social awkwardness. "This is too big for a standard team, for a standard process," Marcus continued, his voice resonating with manufactured sincerity. "I'm going to the board. I'm telling them we need to create a new, specialized division, the Chimera Division, a flagship department with its own budget, its own resources, its own director." He paused, letting the weight of the last word sink in. "And you, Liam, are going to be that director. I'm not talking about a simple team lead promotion. I'm talking about a director-level position, a seat at the table. This is it. This is your ticket. Your name, and only your name, is going to be synonymous with this breakthrough." Liam's mind reeled. The words echoed in the sudden silence of the office. Director Liam Carter. It was more than he had ever dared to dream. Every late night, every missed social event, every sacrifice felt vindicated in that single glorious moment. He felt a wave of profound, unconditional loyalty toward the man standing beside him. "Marcus, I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Say you're ready," Marcus said, his grip tightening on Liam's shoulder. "That's all I need to hear. I'm ready." Liam replied, his voice firm with a newfound sense of purpose. He shook the offered hand, the grip strong and sure. As Liam walked out of that office, he felt like he was floating. The world seemed brighter, the future, a limitless expanse of possibility. He passed Sarah's desk and gave her a wide, triumphant grin, and she returned it with a look of pure, unadulterated joy. He saw a friend celebrating his victory, never once suspecting he was actually looking at the triumphant smile of a thief who had just watched her victim walk away, blissfully unaware that his pockets had already been picked clean. In the 2 weeks that followed Marcus's life-altering promise, Liam existed in a state of surreal anticipation. It was as if he were living in the final few pages of a novel's chapter, knowing a profound and wonderful change was imminent. Marcus had explained that a project of Chimera's magnitude needed to be introduced to the board with care and strategy. He was socializing the concept, greasing the wheels, and setting the stage for the grand reveal. The formal presentation would be the final step, the public coronation. Liam, in his trusting naivety, saw this delay not as a period of scheming, but as a testament to the project's importance. He walked through the halls of Innovatech, a changed man. The ambient noise of the office no longer felt like a distraction, but like the overture to his own success story. He saw the curious glances from his colleagues and interpreted them not as their usual assessment of the quiet outsider, but as the first stirrings of respect for a future leader. His collaboration with Sarah intensified, but its nature subtly changed. He was no longer just sharing his work. He was, in his mind, training his future deputy. They spent hours refining the presentation, with Liam providing the intellectual horsepower and Sarah packaging it in an increasingly polished and charismatic shell. He felt a deep, swelling gratitude for her. He saw her as the key that would unlock the door his genius had built, but his personality could not open. In this blissful state of delusion, he allowed himself to dream. He researched better care facilities for his mother, imagining the look on her face when he told her she would never have to worry about a medical bill again. He sketched out new ideas, extensions of Chimera, projects he could now greenlight himself as a director. He was building a future on a foundation of sand, believing it to be solid rock. The morning of the presentation, he put on the one good suit he owned. It felt different this time, not like a costume, but like a uniform he had finally earned the right to wear. He walked into the office, his head held high, and made his way to the main boardroom, the place where his life was about to begin. The boardroom was an arena of power. A long, dark mahogany table reflected the cold, recessed lighting above. The senior executives, a stern-faced assembly of vice presidents and department heads, were already seated, their expressions a mixture of impatience and curiosity. This was the audience that held the keys to the kingdom. Liam took his place at the front of the room, beside Sarah and Marcus, his heart pounding a triumphant rhythm against his ribs. He arranged his notes, his mind clear and focused. He was ready. Just as the meeting was about to begin, Marcus leaned in close, his hand resting on the back of Liam's chair. His voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Liam, quick change of plans," he said, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. "I need you to sit back and handle the technical Q&A at the end. Really get into the weeds if they ask. For the main presentation, I'm having Sarah and Chad walk them through the strategic overview. We need to show a strong, collaborative front. It looks better for the project." The name hit Liam like a physical blow. Chad? Why in the world was Chad here? He looked past Marcus and saw Chad standing by the podium, looking smug and self-important, dressed in a suit that was far too expensive for his position. Liam opened his mouth to question, to understand, but Marcus was already stepping away, clapping his hands together to draw the room's attention. The world began to tilt, the sounds of the room compressing into a low hum in Liam's ears. Marcus launched into his introduction, his voice booming with a manufactured passion. He spoke of innovation, of a paradigm shift, of the dawn of a new era for Innovatech. "This is a moment that will redefine our future," he declared. "And at the forefront of this revolution are two of our most visionary talents. The brilliant minds who have poured their hearts and souls into developing this groundbreaking platform." Liam waited for his name, a name that never came. "Please join me in welcoming the leads of Project Chimera, Sarah Jenkins, and Chad Miller." Time stopped. In that single, frozen moment, Liam's carefully constructed future shattered into a million pieces. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, to look at Sarah. He was desperately searching for a sign, a glance of apology, a hint that this was all some horrible misunderstanding. He found nothing. Her back was already turned to him. She had stepped into the spotlight, her face illuminated by the projector's glow, her expression one of fierce, confident ambition. She did not look at him. She would not look at him. And in that moment, he understood. The past 2 weeks, the late nights, the shared dream, it had all been a lie. A long, elaborate, and perfectly executed con. The presentation began. Sarah was magnificent. She was a performer at the height of her powers. She spoke with a fluency and passion that was mesmerizing, using the very words and analogies that Liam had so excitedly shared with her in the quiet of his apartment-like office. She had stolen more than his code. She had stolen his voice, his passion, his very soul, and was now wearing it like a costume. Chad, her bumbling sidekick, chimed in with buzzwords and vapid corporate cheerleading, creating the illusion of a dynamic team. They presented Chimera, but it was a lesser version. They had sanded off its more complex, revolutionary edges, making it simpler, more commercially palatable, a version that was easier for them to understand and for the executives to approve. Liam sat cemented to his chair, a spectator at his own execution. The praise that should have been his was being showered upon them. He could feel the eyes of the other executives in the room, and he knew what they saw. The quiet, awkward coder, sitting in the shadow of the 2 brilliant stars. He was a footnote to his own life's work. Once, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline, he tried to speak. As Chad fumbled an explanation of the predictive algorithm, Liam half stood, his voice a dry crackle. Actually, he began, the original architecture is designed to. He was cut off instantly. Marcus, with the speed of a seasoned politician, interjected with a broad, disarming smile. An excellent point, Liam. That's a perfect example of the kind of deep-dive technical expertise Liam will be providing during our Q&A session. A great thought to hold. For now, let's keep our focus on the 30,000-foot view. A true team effort, as you can all see. The words were like a physical restraint, pushing him back down into his chair. It was a public and complete neutering. He had been relegated, dismissed, and silenced in front of the entire company leadership. The meeting concluded to a resounding round of applause. The executives rose, their faces beaming, and crowded around Marcus, Sarah, and Chad, shaking their hands, patting their backs. Liam remained in his chair, invisible. The vibrant scene of celebration felt like it was happening behind a thick pane of glass. He saw Sarah laugh, a bright, genuine-looking laugh, as a vice president congratulated her. That image, the sound of her laughter, the sight of her triumph, built on the ashes of his trust, was seared into his memory. Slowly, the room emptied, the buzz of excitement moving out into the hallway. Liam was left alone in the cavernous, silent boardroom. The projector, forgotten, still cast the title slide onto the screen, Project Chimera, by Sarah Jenkins and Chad Miller. The applause was long gone, but for Liam, the silence that remained was the loudest sound he had ever heard. He did not return to his desk. To sit in his chair, surrounded by the architecture of his former life, felt like an impossible act of self-deception. The applause from the boardroom was a ghostly echo in his mind, each clap a nail being hammered into the coffin of his career. He saw Marcus, Sarah, and Chad emerge from the corridor, bathed in the afterglow of their triumph, accepting congratulations from a fawning crowd of colleagues. The sight, so obscene in its injustice, solidified the shock in his chest into a single cold point of rage. He didn't shout, he didn't run. He simply waited, a statue of silent fury, until the crowd thinned and the 3 of them were momentarily alone. He stepped into their path, and the celebratory atmosphere instantly evaporated. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was unnaturally calm, devoid of any inflection, and that made it more menacing than any shout could ever be. Marcus, ever the performer, was the first to recover. He forced a wide, paternal smile. "Liam, great job handling the tech side of things. We make a hell of a team, eh?" He started to clap Liam on the shoulder, but Liam took a half step back, and Marcus's hand fell into empty air. The rejection was small, but absolute. Liam's eyes were fixed on his director. "Why?" he asked, the single word cutting through the corporate platitudes. Marcus's smile tightened. He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Let's not do this here. Look, you're seeing this the wrong way. This was about strategy, about playing the game. Sarah and Chad have the presentation skills, the optics. You're the genius behind the curtain. That's a powerful position. I put you in a role to do what you do best, free from all the political nonsense." It was a masterful piece of gaslighting, an attempt to reframe his demotion as a promotion, his humiliation as a gift. It was so brazenly dishonest that Liam felt a dizzying sense of detachment, as if he were observing a scene from a particularly cynical play. He turned his gaze to Sarah, and the cold rage was now mingled with a profound, aching pain. "Sarah?" His voice cracked, the first sign of the wound beneath the ice. "I trusted you. We were a team." This was her cue. The triumphant, confident woman from the boardroom vanished, replaced by a trembling, fragile victim. Her eyes filled with tears, her lower lip quivered. "Liam, please," she whispered, her voice choked with manufactured emotion. "You have to believe me. I didn't have a choice." She took a step closer, as if to confide a terrible secret. "Marcus came to me last week. He said the board would never approve a project of this scale being led by someone who wasn't a people person. He was going to shelve it, Liam. He was going to let Chimera die." Each word was a poisoned dart, dipped in the truth of his own insecurities. "I thought," she continued, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek, "that if I stepped up, I could save it. I could keep it alive. I did it for the project. I did it for us. I thought you would understand." It was a disgusting, brilliant performance. She had painted herself as a martyr, a tragic hero who had sacrificed her integrity for the greater good, his good. It was a lie so profound, so deeply insulting to his intelligence and his trust, that it shocked him back into clarity. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and he saw past the tears. He saw the cold, hard ambition glittering in her eyes. He saw the puppeteer, not the puppet. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to hear any more. He gave her one last look, a look that held all the weight of his shattered faith, a look that told her he saw exactly who and what she was. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, the sound of her calling his name fading behind him. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was already a dead man walking. He was a loose end, a living, breathing contradiction to the heroic narrative they had just sold to the board. He spent that night, not sleeping, but processing. He sat in the dark of his apartment, the code for Chimera open on his monitor, a digital testament to his folly. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something colder, harder, and more enduring. It was the quiet, patient clarity of absolute ruin. The next morning, the expected email was in his inbox. The subject line was deceptively simple: follow-up, meeting. It was from HR. He felt no surprise, no fear, only the grim satisfaction of being right. His walk through the office to the 11th floor felt like a final tour through a foreign country. He noticed the way his colleagues would start to smile, then see his face and quickly look away, suddenly fascinated by their computer screens. The news, the whispers, had already poisoned the well. He was no longer one of them. He was a problem to be solved. The scene in the HR office was a sterile echo of the one from the introduction, but this time, all pretense of warmth had been stripped away. Marcus was there, his face a mask of detached, professional concern. The HR manager, Miss Albright, had a folder open in front of her. She did not make eye contact. She began to speak in a low, steady monotone, her words clearly taken from a script. "Liam, following the events of yesterday's presentation, and after a careful and thorough review of your overall integration with the team dynamics, the company has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Marcus leaned forward, sealing the verdict with a final, crushing piece of corporate doublespeak. "It's about the culture, Liam," he said, his voice laced with false sympathy. "The success of a project like Chimera depends on seamless collaboration and a positive, team-first attitude. Your reaction yesterday, your clear unwillingness to celebrate a team victory, demonstrated a fundamental misalignment with the core values we foster at Innovatic. It's not personal, it's business. It was the ultimate insult. His righteous fury at being cheated and betrayed was being framed as poor sportsmanship. His integrity was being defined as a character flaw. Liam Carter's trial and sentencing were complete. He had been found guilty of not fitting in. This time, there was no shock. There was no pain. There was only a vast, empty silence. He signed the papers, his hand steady. He slid his laptop and his now useless badge across the table. He stood, looked Marcus dead in the eye for a long, unnerving moment, and then walked out of the room without a word. He didn't look back. As the elevator descended, he felt the weight of his life at Innovatech fall away. He stepped out into the lobby, and as the automatic glass doors slid open, he was hit by the light of a world that was suddenly, irrevocably new. He had lost everything. But in that absolute loss, a dangerous kind of freedom was born. The world outside the glass doors of Innovatech was jarringly indifferent to the implosion of Liam's life. The city traffic hummed its monotonous song, and people rushed past him on the sidewalk, their faces set with the purpose of lives that were still intact. He felt like a ghost, an invisible man disconnected from the rhythm of the world. The first few weeks were a descent into a gray, featureless abyss. He would wake up and for a single, blissful moment, forget. Then the memory of the boardroom, of Sarah's triumphant, lying face, of Marcus's clinical dismissal would crash down upon him with the force of a physical blow. He went through the motions of a job search, updating his resume, writing cover letters. But his efforts were met with a wall of polite, impenetrable silence. The initial phone screenings would go well, his technical knowledge impressing the recruiters. Then would come the inevitable question, "Can you tell us about your time at Innovatech?" He would try to be neutral, professional, but then they would check his references. He could almost hear Marcus's voice on the other end of the line, dripping with false sincerity. "Liam? A true genius with code. A real lone wolf. Not much of a team player, if you catch my meaning. Needs a specific kind of environment to thrive." It was a quiet, professional assassination, a character reference that was more damning than any outright criticism. The rejections piled up, each one a fresh layer of salt in a wound that refused to heal. His savings, meant for his mother's long-term care, began to dwindle at an alarming rate. The shame was the worst part. It was a constant, bitter taste in his mouth. He had built his entire identity on the foundation of his competence, his ability to provide. Now, he felt like a failure not just as an engineer, but as a son. The quiet of his apartment, once a sanctuary, became a prison. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was accusatory. He stopped coding, his passion curdled by the memory of what it had cost him. His belief in a world governed by logic and merit had been a childish fantasy, and its destruction left him adrift in a meaningless universe. He hit the bottom on a Tuesday, exactly 3 months after he was fired. A final, promising job prospect had just evaporated after the reference check. He sat in the dark, staring at the screen of his powered-down computer, and for the first time, he felt nothing at all. Not anger, not sadness, just a vast, terrifying emptiness. It was in that void that a single, defiant spark ignited. If the world refused to recognize his value, he would prove it to himself. He turned on his computer, not to look for jobs, but to create. He wouldn't build another grand project for a world that didn't deserve it. Instead, he channeled all his frustration and intellectual energy into a single, focused pursuit. He wrote a theoretical paper, a dense, 20-page monograph on a highly niche subject, non-linear methodologies for predictive data structuring in volatile markets. It was academically rigorous, intellectually pure, and completely divorced from any commercial application. It was a testament to the beauty of logic itself. He didn't send it to any journals. He simply uploaded the PDF to a small, obscure, online archive for academic papers, a place frequented only by a handful of data scientists and university professors. It was not a resume. It was a final, defiant scream into the digital void. Then he let it go. Weeks passed. The emptiness began to return. And then, an email appeared in his inbox. It was different from the automated rejection letters. The sender's domain was sterlingholdings.com. The name sent a jolt through him. Sterling Holdings was the massive, almost mythical private equity firm that owned dozens of companies, including a small, underperforming tech firm named Innovatech Solutions. Liam's first thought was that it was a mistake, or perhaps some cruel, final joke. But the subject line was specific, regarding your monograph on predictive data structuring. The email, from a senior talent acquisition executive, was brief and formal. It expressed a deep interest in the theories outlined in his paper and requested a meeting to discuss his research. There was no mention of Innovatech. There was no request for a resume. They weren't interested in the man who had been fired. They were interested in the mind that had written the paper. With nothing left to lose, he agreed. The Sterling Holdings headquarters was in a different universe from Innovatech. The lobby wasn't a playground of bright colors and beanbag chairs. It was a cathedral of granite, dark mahogany, and hushed power. The air smelled of old money and quiet confidence. It was a place where decisions that shaped industries were made, not where Chad organized a fantasy football league. Liam, expecting to meet a mid-level analyst, was instead escorted to the top floor and ushered into a vast corner office. Seated behind a large, uncluttered desk was a man who seemed as old as the building itself. This was Arthur Sterling. He was in his late 70s, dressed in a perfectly tailored three-piece suit, with thin, silver hair and eyes that were a pale, piercing blue. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. He gestured for Liam to sit, the movement economical and precise. There was no small talk. On the desk between them was Liam's paper, printed and bound, covered in handwritten notes and annotations. "Mr. Carter," Sterling began, his voice a quiet, gravelly baritone. "I've read your paper, twice. Your theory on mapping chaotic data points suggests an intuitive leap that is rare. Explain to me your reasoning for abandoning the traditional Bayesian model on page 12. This was not an interview, it was a high-level intellectual debate. Liam, for the first time in months, felt the gears of his mind engage. He forgot his nervousness, forgot his anger, forgot everything but the pure, exhilarating joy of discussing his work with someone who not only understood it, but could challenge it on its deepest levels. For half an hour, they spoke a language that only they could comprehend. Finally, Mr. Sterling leaned back, his piercing eyes scrutinizing Liam. "I spoke with Marcus Vance at Innovatech," he said flatly. Liam's blood ran cold. "He described you as a brilliant programmer, but difficult to manage. A man who doesn't fit the culture." Sterling paused, letting the words hang in the air. "In my experience, Mr. Carter, people described as difficult are often just intelligent individuals who are deeply impatient with incompetence. I, too, am deeply impatient with incompetence." He steepled his fingers. "I am not hiring you to fit in. I am hiring you to stand out. I am creating a new position for you on my personal strategic analysis team. You will not write a single line of code. You will analyze our acquisitions, our portfolio companies. You will find the inefficiencies they try to hide and the truths they are too political to speak. You will report directly to me. Your only loyalty will be to the data." Liam was stunned into silence. It was a position that didn't just offer him a job, it offered him a purpose, perfectly aligned with his nature. He wasn't being asked to change. He was being weaponized. "I accept," Liam said, his voice steady and clear for the first time in months. "Mr." Sterling gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and extended a dry, steady hand across the desk. As Liam shook it, he knew his time in the abyss was over. He had thrown a message of pure intellect into the void, and a king had answered. The 2 years that followed were not a time of healing, they were a time of reforging. To heal is to return to a former state, but the man Liam Carter was before his termination at Innovatech was gone forever, consumed in the fire of betrayal. What emerged from that fire, under the tutelage of Arthur Sterling, was something harder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. His first 6 months at Sterling Holdings were a brutal lesson in humility. He was an anomaly, a coder dropped into a shark tank of Ivy League financiers, corporate lawyers, and ruthless market strategists. They spoke a language of leverage, of mergers and acquisitions, of hostile takeovers, a dialect of power he had never needed to learn. In meetings, he would sit in silence, the quiet, observant man once again, but this time his silence was born not of social anxiety, but of a desperate need to learn and survive. His relationship with Mr. Sterling was the anchor in this storm. Their sessions were not mentorships in the modern, gentle sense of the word. They were interrogations. Sterling would present Liam with a spreadsheet, a company's annual report, thick with promising numbers and optimistic projections. "The data says this company is a sound investment, Carter," Sterling would say, his voice a low rumble. "Now, tell me where the lies are." Every spreadsheet tells a story, but the most important information is in the story it chooses not to tell. He would force Liam to look beyond the numbers, to see the human element, the greed, the fear, the ambition that shaped them. On his first major assignment, analyzing a struggling manufacturing firm, Liam presented a flawless data model predicting its inevitable bankruptcy. Sterling glanced at it and pushed it back across the desk. "This is a fine autopsy, but I hired you for diagnostics," he said. "The numbers tell me the patient is dying. I want you to go there and find out the disease. Go to the factory, smell the air. Talk to the woman who has worked on the assembly line for 30 years. Talk to the union boss who hates the CEO. Data is the skeleton. Carter, I need you to find the flesh and the blood." Liam went. He spent a week in a dreary factory town, walking the floor, listening. It was awkward, uncomfortable, and utterly transformative. He learned that the company's problems weren't in the spreadsheets, they were in the resentful eyes of the workers, in the outdated machinery the executives had refused to upgrade, in the quiet desperation of a town that depended on a dying giant. He learned that numbers could be manipulated, but the truth had a weight, a texture, that could only be felt firsthand. This was the first great lesson. Data without context is just noise. He returned to Sterling's office, not with a better spreadsheet, but with a story. And it was this story that allowed Sterling Holdings to structure a takeover that not only saved the company, but made it profitable within a year. Liam had started to see the world not as lines of code, but as a complex, messy, and exploitable human system. Over the next year, his confidence grew in lockstep with his reputation. He was no longer the awkward coder in the corner. He was Mr. Sterling's secret weapon, a title he now understood the true meaning of. He developed a unique and terrifying talent for corporate archaeology, the ability to dig through layers of financial reports and corporate jargon to unearth the hidden truths of a company. He identified a celebrated tech startup in their portfolio as a house of cards, its entire valuation built on a single, fraudulent patent, saving the firm $1 billion loss when it inevitably collapsed. He found a small, overlooked logistics company in Germany, saw the genius in its routing algorithm that everyone else had dismissed, and championed its acquisition. That company was now the crown jewel of their European operations. He learned to play the game. He watched how Sterling navigated the treacherous currents of the boardroom, a master of calculated silence and understated power. He saw how Sterling dealt with an ambitious, backstabbing executive, not by confronting him directly, but by promoting him into a position where his own arrogance would lead to his inevitable public failure. It was a lesson in patience, a lesson in allowing your enemies to destroy themselves. It was a world away from Marcus Vance's clumsy, cowardly betrayal. Liam's external persona began to reflect his internal change. He still spoke rarely in large meetings, but when he did, the room fell silent. His words were precise, backed by irrefutable data, and delivered with a calm, unshakable authority. The other executives, who had once dismissed him as the chairman's pet project, began to treat him with a cautious, deferential respect. They understood that he was not playing their game of politics and alliances. He was the umpire, calling balls and strikes with the cold, impartial authority of the data itself, and he had the unwavering support of the man who owned the entire league. He was still quiet, still reserved, but his silence was no longer a shield to hide behind. It was a cloak that concealed the immense power he now wielded. The wounded, naive man, who had been fired for not fitting in, had been replaced by a quiet predator who could dismantle a company from 1,000 miles away. The final stage of his metamorphosis came in the last 6 months of his second year. Mr. Sterling began to trust him not just with analysis, but with strategy. Liam was leading teams, making recommendations that shifted tens of millions of dollars, his voice becoming a direct extension of the chairman's will. Their relationship had evolved into one of a commander and his most trusted field general. The test of his readiness came, as it always does, without warning. He was summoned to Sterling's office late one afternoon. The chairman was looking out the window, his back to the room. Without turning, he spoke. "Innovatic Solutions is failing," he said, his voice flat. "That project they launched 2 years ago, the one they were so proud of, Chimera. It's been a catastrophic failure. It's burning through capital with no return, and the entire division is rotten with infighting and incompetence." Sterling turned, and in his hand was a single, slim folder. The logo on the front was a ghost from another lifetime. He slid it across the polished expanse of his desk. "Your old colleagues have run that company into the ground," he said, his pale eyes locking onto Liam's. "I need a full, deep-dive analysis. I want to know every mistake, every wrong turn, every dollar wasted. I want you to tell me if there is anything left to salvage, or if my only sensible option is to liquidate the entire division and write it off as a loss." Liam stood, walked to the desk, and picked up the folder. His face was a perfect, unreadable mask of professional composure. The folder felt both as light as paper and as heavy as a tombstone in his hands. The past was no longer a source of pain, it was just another data set. The boy who was cast out had been remade, and now the king was sending him home to pass judgment on those who had usurped the throne. While Liam Carter was being reforged in the crucibles of high finance and corporate strategy, Innovatic Solutions, the company that had cast him out, was slowly, inexorably, beginning to rot from the inside. The culture of vibrant, collaborative energy that Marcus Vance so proudly championed had, without a foundation of genuine integrity, curdled into a toxic soup of paranoia, blame-shifting, and incompetence. The spectacular launch presentation of Project Chimera had secured Marcus his promotion to senior vice president and had made Sarah Jenkins a director. But the triumph was fleeting, a brilliant flash of light before a long, dark decay. The problem was simple and catastrophic. Neither Sarah nor Chad, for all their presentational flair and political savvy, truly understood what Liam had built. They had stolen a sophisticated engine, but had no idea how to maintain it, let alone drive it. Liam's architecture was elegant and complex, designed for precision and scalability. In their hands, it became a clumsy, bloated mess. They demanded new features without understanding the structural consequences, patched bugs with clumsy code that created 10 new problems, and consistently misinterpreted the predictive data the system produced. The result was a flagship project that was perpetually behind schedule, over budget, and riddled with critical failures. The atmosphere within the Chimera division was poisonous. Sarah, out of her depth technically, ruled with an iron fist, her management style, a brittle combination of micromanagement and frantic demands. She saw every question as a challenge to her authority and every setback as a personal betrayal. Chad, having risen far beyond his level of competence, excelled only at deflecting responsibility. He became a master of blaming other departments, citing vague market headwinds, and weaving complex excuses that sounded plausible in a meeting but collapsed under the slightest scrutiny. Marcus, now comfortably ensconced in his new executive role, was a distant and disinterested landlord. He had used Chimera to secure his promotion. Its subsequent failure was now an annoying problem to be managed, not a crisis to be solved. He demanded positive progress reports, and his subordinates, terrified of his displeasure, gave him exactly what he wanted. They presented doctored metrics, cherry-picked data, and optimistic projections that bore no resemblance to reality. The talented engineers, the ones who, like Liam, were there to do good work, saw the writing on the wall. They left, one by one, tired of the political games and the technical chaos. They were replaced by people like Chad, mediocre talents who excelled at navigating the toxic culture. The company was actively selecting against the very competence it needed to survive. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, in a quiet, secure data analysis suite at Sterling Holdings, Liam Carter was conducting an autopsy. For a month, he had been a ghost in their machine. Mr. Sterling had granted him unprecedented, administrator-level access to every corner of Innovatech's digital infrastructure. He moved through their servers and email archives like a phantom, silent and unseen. It was a methodical and dispassionate process. He wasn't a man seeking revenge. He was a scientist observing a failed experiment. But as he worked, a cold, quiet satisfaction settled over him. The data told the story with brutal, mathematical clarity. He read the frantic email chains between Sarah and the engineers, her lack of understanding painfully obvious in every exchange. He saw the project management logs, a chaotic litany of missed deadlines and cascading failures. He traced the financial hemorrhage, watching millions of dollars being burned on their blundering attempts to fix a system they had broken. He saw the reports they sent to Marcus, and then he saw the even more heavily sanitized versions Marcus sent up to the board of Sterling Holdings. It was a perfect, layered onion of deceit. He worked for 4 weeks, sleeping little, fueled by a singular, cold focus. The result was not a letter of complaint. It was a 117-page report, a masterpiece of objective evisceration, filled with charts, network diagrams, and damning data points. The executive summary was a single, devastating paragraph that concluded, "The systemic failure at Innovatech is not technical, it is cultural. The leadership has fostered an environment where perception is valued over reality, and loyalty is valued over competence. The division is no longer salvageable under its current structure. Recommend complete executive overhaul and strategic reset." He presented the report to Arthur Sterling in a meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. The old man read the executive summary, his face impassive. He looked up from the page, his pale blue eyes meeting Liam's. "Your recommendation is concise and without sentiment," Sterling stated. It was the highest form of praise he ever gave. "It is approved. Prepare a transition plan." The storm was about to break. Back at Innovatech, it was a Friday afternoon. A nervous calm had settled over the office. They had survived the audit from corporate headquarters. Marcus, Sarah, and Chad had spent weeks preparing their presentations, hiding the rot under a thick layer of polish and corporate jargon. They believed they had succeeded. Marcus was in his office, dictating a self-congratulatory memo to his team. Sarah and Chad were joking by the coffee machine, planning celebratory drinks. The worst, they believed, was over. At precisely 4 o'clock, an email appeared in every employee's inbox. The sender was the office of the chairman, Sterling Holdings. The subject line was stark, an important announcement regarding the future of Innovatech. A hush fell over the open plan office as, one by one, people began to read. Clicks of the mouse were followed by sharp intakes of breath, then a spreading, tomb-like silence. In his glass-walled office, Marcus Vance's confident smile slowly dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. At the coffee machine, Sarah Jenkins's face drained of all color, her hand trembling so badly she nearly dropped her cup. Chad stared at his screen, his brow furrowed, rereading the words as if his brain could not parse their meaning. The email was brief, professional, and utterly brutal. It announced a radical restructuring of the company to address deep-seated performance and cultural challenges. And then came the final paragraph, the one that stopped every heart. To lead Innovatech through this crucial period of transformation and to restore its founding spirit of pure, merit-based innovation, we have appointed a new president, effective this coming Monday. Marcus Vance will be stepping down to pursue other opportunities. Please join us in welcoming Mr. Liam Carter, the name hung in the silent air of the office. A ghost, a forgotten footnote, a man they had erased. Liam Carter, their new boss. The storm hadn't just arrived. The quietest man they had ever known was the storm, and he had just made landfall directly in the center of their world. The weekend following the announcement was a long, silent scream for the management of Innovatex Solutions. Friday's 4 p.m. email had detonated with the force of a tactical weapon, leaving behind a crater of shock and terror. The company's Slack channels, usually buzzing with weekend plans and gossip, fell eerily silent. People waited. They didn't know what to expect, but they knew that the ghost who was once their quietest and most dismissed colleague was returning, and he would not be the same man who had left. Monday morning arrived not with a storm, but with an unnerving, unnatural calm. The office, normally a hive of activity and loud greetings, was as quiet as a library during final exams. Everyone was at their desks by 8:30 a.m., pretending to work with a frantic intensity, but every eye was fixed on the elevator bank. At 9 o'clock precisely, the elevator doors slid open and Liam Carter stepped out. The transformation was absolute. The man who had been escorted from this building 2 years ago was a ghost of a memory. That Liam wore ill-fitting sweaters and carried his life in a worn backpack. This Liam wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet, immense wealth. His posture was ramrod straight, and he carried a single, slim leather briefcase. He was no longer a coder. He was a manifestation of the cold, hard power of Sterling Holdings. He began to walk from the elevator to the corner office. Marcus's old office and the open-plan workspace became a gauntlet of fear. The sound of his polished shoes on the concrete floor was the only sound in the vast room. He did not smile. He did not frown. His face was a mask of neutral, analytical focus. His gaze swept across the floor, and though he didn't lock eyes with any single person, everyone felt the weight of his observation. They saw him, and they knew with a sinking certainty that he saw right through them, through their feigned productivity, their anxieties, their complicity. He was no longer one of them. He was an outside force, an auditor of souls, and they were the subjects of his dispassionate study. He reached his office, the glass box from which Marcus once ruled, and slid the door shut without a backward glance. He didn't unpack. He didn't inspect his new domain. He placed his briefcase on the desk, opened his laptop, and in the profound silence of his new office, he began his reign. 5 minutes later, a calendar invitation appeared in the inboxes of every director and senior manager. The attendees included Sarah Jenkins and Chad Miller. The subject was simple and devoid of warmth. Innovatech Strategic Review, 10 a.m. main boardroom. The location was not lost on anyone. It was the same room where Liam's career had been publicly executed. At 10 o'clock, they filed in like prisoners being led to a sentencing. The mood was funereal. They took their seats, leaving a wide, empty space around the head of the table. Sarah and Chad tried to make themselves small, choosing seats near the far end, hoping to disappear into the background. Liam entered last. He walked to the head of the table, placed his laptop down, and looked at the seating arrangement. Director Jenkins. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice calm and even. "Please, take the seats here, in the front. I value your proximity." It was a command, not a request. White-faced, they gathered their things and moved to the seats directly opposite him, the seats of the accused. Liam remained standing. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His quiet authority filled the room, sucking the air out of it. "Good morning," he began. "As you know, Sterling Holdings has initiated a leadership transition. My mandate from the chairman is direct and absolute: to conduct a full, transparent, and data-driven audit of all operations. Our objective is to identify the core inefficiencies that have led to the company's current underperformance and to restore a culture of genuine, merit-based innovation." He paused, his eyes sweeping over each face at the table, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on Sarah, then Chad. "To that end," he continued, "we will begin a top-to-bottom review of every project, every budget, and every team, effective immediately. Nothing will be exempt." He took a breath, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "We will begin with the single largest and most consequential investment this company has made in the last 24 months. We will begin with Project Chimera." He turned his gaze directly to Sarah, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than neutrality appeared in his eyes. the cold, hard glint of a scientist about to begin a dissection. Director Jenkins, tomorrow morning at 9, you will walk my transition team and me through the entire history of the project, from its initial proposal to its current, lamentable state. Be prepared to justify every strategic decision, every budget allocation, and every deviation from the original design specifications. I will expect a complete data set. He then turned to Chad. Mr. Miller, you will be prepared to explain the marketing and client integration strategy and why it has resulted in a near-zero adoption rate. The professionalism of the attack was its most brutal feature. He wasn't accusing them of betrayal, he was accusing them of incompetence, and he was demanding they provide him with the very data that would serve as the rope for their own hanging. He closed his laptop. That is all for now. I expect your full and unconditional cooperation. He turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a stunned, terrified silence in his wake. For the rest of the day, he did not remain in his office. He walked the floor. He moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, a general reviewing his troops. But he didn't stop to talk to the managers. He walked past their offices and stopped at the desks of the junior programmers, the data analysts, the quality assurance testers, the people who did the actual work. He'd stand behind them, look at their screens, and ask quiet, pointed questions. What's the current bug-to-feature ratio on this build? Why is this API call timing out? Show me the documentation for this module. He spoke their language, the language of pure logic and code that had been ignored for 2 years. The junior staff, initially terrified, found themselves answering honestly. For the first time in years, a person in leadership seemed to care about the work itself, not the politics surrounding it. From across the office, Sarah and Chad watched this happen, and a new, more profound terror began to set in. He wasn't just coming for them from the top down. He was systematically gathering intelligence from the bottom up, bypassing their authority entirely. He was mapping out their every failure, every shortcut, every lie, from the very people they had forced to implement them. As the day ended, Liam stood alone in the center of the silent office, looking at the large, faded sign on the wall that still read, "Innovation through collaboration." His face was impassive, but his eyes were alive with cold calculation. This was not a quest for revenge. Vengeance was a messy, emotional affair. This was a system restoration. He was the administrator, and he had just spent his first day running a diagnostic on a deeply corrupted network. The next step was to isolate and purge the malware. The morning of the reckoning arrived with the cold, gray light of dawn. The main boardroom, a place of so many ghosts, had been prepared. It was starkly minimalist. The long mahogany table was empty, except for a single laptop at its head and 2 bottles of water placed precisely in front of the chairs opposite. There were no notepads, no pens. The large screen on the wall was blank, waiting. Liam was already there when Sarah and Chad arrived, sitting motionless at the head of the table. He was the only member of his transition team present. This was not going to be a corporate review, it was to be a private, personal judgment. Sarah and Chad looked like they hadn't slept in days. Their faces were pale, their movements stiff with anxiety. They clutched a thick binder filled with the slides and reports they had frantically assembled, a paper shield against the coming onslaught. They tried to project an air of professional cooperation, but the fear radiated from them in palpable waves. Liam did not greet them. He simply watched them take their seats, then glanced at the clock on the wall. At 9 o'clock, on the exact second, he spoke. "Director Jenkins," he began, his voice a flat, unemotional instrument. "You have the floor. As requested, please begin with Project Chimera's inception and outline the strategic goals as you understood them." He then leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and fixed his gaze upon her. It was the calm, patient gaze of a predator that knows its prey is trapped. Sarah began, her voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to the booming confidence she had displayed in this very room 2 years prior. She launched into the polished, sanitized narrative they had been peddling for years, a story filled with empty corporate jargon. She spoke of agile pivots in response to shifting market dynamics and strategic recalibrations designed to maximize user engagement. Chad would nod along dutifully, occasionally chiming in with a hollow affirmation. It was a presentation designed to create an impenetrable fog of buzzwords, a defense mechanism to obscure the simple truth of their failure. Liam allowed the charade to continue for precisely 10 minutes. He let her build her flimsy house of cards. Then, he made his first move. As Sarah was explaining a key decision from early in their leadership, she said, "We made the strategic choice to simplify the core predictive algorithm. Our analysis suggested that a more streamlined approach would yield faster results for our key client demographic." "One moment," Liam interrupted. The words were quiet, but they cut through her speech like a scalpel. He typed a command on his laptop, and the large screen behind Sarah flickered to life. It was an email. An email from Sarah's own lead engineer, dated 3 weeks after the simplification. Liam read it aloud in his steady monotone. "Director Jenkins, I am formally stating for the record that the changes mandated to the core algorithm have fundamentally broken its predictive capabilities. Decoupling the tertiary data feeds to streamline the process is like removing the eyes and ears of a navigator to make the ship lighter. The original, more complex design was not a bug. It was the entire point. All long-term projections will now be statistically worthless." Liam's eyes lifted from the screen and met hers. The data shows that this expert, a man with a PhD in data science, was reassigned to a legacy project a week after sending this email. Why was his advice, and the advice of his entire team, ignored? Sarah stammered, completely blindsided. We had to make a tough call. For the sake of the timeline, this became the rhythm of the execution. Every strategic lie Sarah or Chad presented was met with an irrefutable, documented truth from Liam. He was a master of their own history, wielding their own words and decisions as weapons. When Chad tried to explain away the project's massive budget overruns by citing unforeseen development hurdles, Liam projected the detailed financial reports onto the screen. "The records show a $7 million overrun," Liam stated. $6 million of that was allocated to emergency third-party contractors brought in to fix the very cascading system failures that your lead engineer warned you about in his email. This wasn't an unforeseen hurdle, Mr. Miller. It was a predictable catastrophe of your own making. Please, explain to me the return on that investment." When Sarah boasted about a successful feature rollout in the second quarter of the previous year, Liam displayed the user analytics. "The feature you are referring to, which cost $1.2 million to develop, had a 98% user opt-out rate within its first month. The support team received over 4,000 complaint tickets directly related to its instability before it was quietly deprecated 3 months later. Was that the metric for success you were aiming for?" He dismantled them piece by piece, not with rage, but with their own undeniable data. He exposed how they had consistently sacrificed long-term stability for short-term, superficial wins that looked good on a slide deck. He showed them the timeline of their best engineers resigning, each departure happening within weeks of a major, ill-advised strategic change they had forced through. He showed them everything. He proved, with cold, mathematical certainty, that they were not just unlucky managers. They were incompetent architects who had systematically demolished a masterpiece out of sheer arrogance and ignorance. After an hour, they had nothing left. Sarah's presentation was in tatters, the binder of lies sitting useless on the table. She was visibly trembling, her face pale and streaked with tears. Chad was completely silent, his gaze fixed on the table, a man hollowed out, reduced to nothing. The boardroom was filled with a dead, heavy silence. Liam let it hang in the air for a long moment. Then, his tone shifted, losing its clinical edge and becoming something quieter, more personal. He looked directly at Sarah, the woman who had once been his only friend. "The data explains the incompetence," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't explain the betrayal. My final question is not for the director of a failed project. It's for you, Sarah. Why?" The question was the final, fatal blow. There was no corporate doublespeak to hide behind now. There was only the raw, ugly truth of her ambition. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a wretched mixture of shame and self-pity. "I wanted it," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I just wanted to be the one in the spotlight." It was a pathetic, childish confession, and in that moment, all the power she had ever projected was gone. Liam stared at her for a moment longer, his face unreadable. He had his answer. He stood up, the movement signaling the end of the proceedings. "Thank you for your candor," he said, the politeness more cutting than any insult. "You have both confirmed what the data already made abundantly clear. This company has made a catastrophic investment in a failed project overseen by a failed leadership. Your roles, as they currently exist, are strategically and operationally redundant. Human Resources will be in contact with you this afternoon to manage your transitions out of the company." He picked up his laptop and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "That will be all." He walked out, leaving them alone in the vast, silent room, the screen behind them still glowing with the damning evidence of their spectacular, self-inflicted ruin. The judgment was complete. For a long time after Liam left the room, Sarah and Chad remained frozen in the silent boardroom, two statues in a mausoleum of their own making. The news of their termination spread through the office with the speed of a digital wildfire. The whispers were a mixture of shock, pity, and a significant amount of grim satisfaction. To the employees of Innovatech, the story seemed to have reached its logical, if brutal, conclusion. The king had returned, and the pretenders to the throne had been swiftly and publicly deposed. It was a straightforward, almost predictable, corporate execution. They believed the drama was over. They were wrong. As Sarah walked, zombie-like, back to her desk, to begin the humiliating ritual of packing her personal belongings into a cardboard box, she was not met by a cheerful representative from Human Resources. Instead, two tall, implacable figures in dark, conservative suits materialized beside her cubicle. They were flanked by Liam, whose face was as calm and unreadable as it had been all day. The low hum of the office chatter instantly died. Every phone call ended. Every conversation stopped. 100 pairs of eyes were fixed on the scene. Liam's voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried with absolute clarity across the cavern of silent workstations. "My audit of Project Chimera," he began, addressing the entire room, uncovered more than the predictable results of incompetence and mismanagement. It uncovered a deliberate, meticulous, and methodical pattern of industrial sabotage. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Sarah looked up at him, her face a mask of confusion and terror. Liam continued, his gaze locked on her. "My team at Sterling Holdings discovered a series of encrypted financial transactions. Offshore payments made monthly for the last 2.5 years to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "A corporation owned by none other than Marcus Vance." He gestured to one of the security officers, who held up a tablet displaying a damning flowchart of financial data. "The payments originated from a holding company owned by our largest competitor, Cygnus Dynamics. Marcus Vance was not their employee. He was their asset." He connected the final, horrifying dots for the entire, captive audience. Project Chimera, in the right hands, would have destroyed Cygnus's market share. But a failed chimera, one that burned through nearly $30 million of Innovatech's capital before crashing, that would cripple us for years. Marcus wasn't paid to be a director. He was paid to be a saboteur. He finally looked down at Sarah, his voice dropping slightly, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed to get rid of the one person who knew the system's architecture intimately enough to see the subtle, destructive changes he was planning. "He needed to get rid of me." The revelation washed over the room. The firing, the betrayal, the promotion of Sarah and Chad, it was never just about office politics. "My termination wasn't about culture," Liam stated, the final puzzle piece locking into place with an audible click. "It was a strategic necessity. I was the system's only firewall, and you, Sarah, helped him disable me." He looked at her not with anger, but with a kind of weary finality. "Your ambition was the perfect tool. He promised you a throne, knowing full well the kingdom was set to burn. You weren't his partner, you were his alibi." One of the security officers stepped forward. "Sarah Jenkins," he said, his voice polite but firm. "You need to come with us. We have some questions for you regarding your involvement in conspiracy to commit corporate fraud and espionage." As the two officers quietly escorted a completely broken Sarah through the stunned crowd, Liam's phone buzzed. It was a text from Sterling's head of security. A similar scene was playing out at Marcus Vance's suburban mansion across town. They weren't just being fired. They were facing the full, formidable weight of the law. After they were gone, Liam turned to the shell-shocked faces of the remaining employees. His demeanor was not triumphant. It was that of a surgeon who had just completed a difficult, radical procedure. "Today," he said, his voice resonating with a new, foundational authority, "the disease that has been poisoning this company has been excised. The lies are finished. The politics are over." He looked out at the sea of faces, at the good people who had kept their heads down, at the enablers who had looked the other way, at the frightened and the hopeful. What happened here was the end result of a culture that valued charismatic falsehoods over difficult truths. From this moment forward, that culture is dead. Our new culture will be simple. We will be honest, we will be brilliant, we will build things that matter. Your only currency here will be your integrity and the quality of your work. Nothing else. He let his gaze drift from person to person, offering not a threat, but a choice. You have a decision to make. You can be a part of building that future, or you can join the past. The choice is yours. He paused and delivered his final, quiet edict, a piece of wisdom forged in the fires of his own ordeal. And let what happened here today be a lesson. Never, ever underestimate the silence of a person who has endured for too long, because when they finally decide to speak, their words will have the power to dismantle your entire world. With that, he turned and walked toward his office. He stopped at the large window, looking out at the city skyline, the same view Marcus had once coveted. But Liam wasn't seeing a kingdom to be ruled. He was seeing a future to be built. The promise he had made to himself in the cold silence of his termination had been kept. Justice, true and absolute, had been served, and now the work could finally begin.